Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the first live stream of our AI for Tomorrow hackathon. It's been a week since we launched our hackathon, and I hope all of you are having a lot of fun building with AI because I love AI and I'm also looking forward to looking at your applications, the applications that you are building. So, if you have submitted anything or if you are planning to submit anything, you can always use the chat to submit, to share your ideas, and maybe somebody out there will be there to give you some feedback. If not, while we are introducing our guest, you can also maybe drop in the chat about where you're joining from. Like, I am joining in from Bangalore, India, so I would also love to know where you are joining from. Drop it in the chat, and we are here to see. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and our guest will be there to answer those questions. And if you have any questions related to the hackathon or Hashnode, I am here to answer those questions. So, without any delay, I would like to call on stage Ben. Hi, Ben. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
All good, all good. It's almost evening here. What about you? How's the day been for you?
The day has been really good. I got a lot of work done. It's also late afternoon over here where I am. But we just moved, my family and I, so we're living in a bunch of suitcases and duffel bags. So it's like kind of like being a
Okay.
college student all over again. I get a code just
Yeah.
my laptop and my iPad screen on the side, but doing really well. Yeah, this is gonna be fun.
Absolutely. I am very eager to look at what you build. I love live demos, and I also love the project that you had submitted for the hackathon. So I'm all ears to listening if this is a new idea that you're showing us, or if it's the same idea that you're showing how you are built in from scratch. But before that, maybe we can start with an introduction about you.
Yeah, of course. So, hello, everyone. My name is Ben, and I work as a developer advocate at Couchbase. I'm based in Israel and Tel Aviv, and I help run developer community building and developer engagement around the region in Dubai, in Tel Aviv, in other parts of the region as well. And really excited to be here. I've been doing developer relations kind of stuff for about 6, 7 years. So, what I kind of like to do is just to build fun apps and to talk about them, right? Don't we kind of have the best job in the world? We just got to build fun things and
Absolutely.
play with
Yeah.
code all day. We're very lucky.
Exactly. 2 weeks back, so I built this application called the GitHub Roast generator. So you need to
I
put in
saw
your
that
GitHub
one.
username. Yeah, I was just roasting out people. So I think it's really fun, like being in this job role where you can build things for fun. What else does one want? So I can
And that's
totally
your
agree on that.
job. You get to build a GitHub roasting app. Like, who would have
Yeah.
thought? Did you think years ago you were like, I'm going to have a job that's going to pay me to build a GitHub roasting app? That's absolutely incredible.
Absolutely. So I think with that, we can definitely continue chatting. And while you build, I will be here as your cheerleader, maybe asking some questions while you are all there on your VS Code or your ID of choice. But if you are ready, let me know. Then we can start with the demo, or let me know how do you want to start with it. Do you want to have a conversation more about Couchbase, or do you want to straight move into the demo? Let me know how do you want to take this ahead.
So definitely. So let me maybe, if people are not familiar with the stream, I can start by mentioning what Couchbase is and sort of what we
Absolutely.
do, because I think that's important. Maybe a lot of people are familiar with Couchbase already. That may be the case. Couchbase has been around for a little while. Essentially, it's a data platform provider that allows you to store data, retrieve data, access your data, manipulate your data, transform your data in ways which is not always in the most structured manner. Meaning, if you need to have data that's schemaless, you need to have data that changes, that adapts, that adjusts, that takes in different parameters, different fields, different constraints. That, let's say, for example, you're building an e-commerce platform with all different types of products, or you are building a blog and you need data of multimedia data types and not just text, and you're doing a video blog, an audio blog, and a text blog, and all different types of data that needs to live in the same place. So Couchbase provides you with a JSON document store, essentially. So your data is stored as JSON, it's manipulated as JSON, and Couchbase also provides you with what we call SQL++, which is basically the ability to write SQL as if you're interacting with a SQL database. You're not interacting with the SQL database, but you can use the joins and the inserts and all the other SQL syntax and language that you may either love or hate or be terrified of. You can use all of them with a non-SQL and NoSQL database, a JSON document store. And I think what's really cool, the latest thing, is that we're also working with vectors, right? You can store vectors, and that's exactly what gets to our conversation today, because a lot of generative AI is actually, people may not realize this, but a lot of generative AI is actually powered by what? We know, by vectors, right?
Exactly.
And vectors are like these weird things that you probably, unless you were working in mathematics until recently, you probably never even came across. Like, unless you were a math PhD or a math focus in university, why would you ever think of the word vector? It just never even came up in one's vernacular. But now in the world of generative AI, of course, it's very prominent, very important. That's because the data is embedded in vectors. Do we know what a vector is? Like, I'm sure you've come across that word before.
Yes, but I think for our audience, everybody here would love to hear about vectors and especially its relevance in AI. So maybe you can brief us a little bit on that.
Yeah, so this is my understanding of a vector from a liberal arts major and a web developer. So ready for it? Here we go. A vector is basically taking any kind of data and understanding its mathematical representation and storing that in basically a set of numbers in a vector that represents that data in numerical form. And why this is important, how this is important, and let's say you have data X, and data X might be a document that says clothing sale coming this spring. And clothing sale coming this spring is transformed into its mathematical form and stored as vectors, stored as mathematical vectors. And then when you, let's say you're searching in that document and your search query is winter sales, right? That search query in a vector-driven search, that query is also converted to vectors. And how, in fact, does the search actually return a result? By looking for similarity between vector X and vector Y, and understanding that there is a 0.84 or 84% similarity between this vector and this vector, therefore I'm going to return this vector. And of course, like, one document with only one sentence is a very simple example, but you can even do this with non-text, right? You could do this with images. You can convert images into a series of vectors and do image search. And let's say you're at I love this example, right? Let's say you're at a grocery store and you have like a point of sale. I don't know, do you have these yet in your grocery stores? We have them here, where you walk into the grocery store and you can get like your own like scanning thing, and you can scan your own items yourself. You have that?
Yes,
Do you
yes,
have that
yes,
yet?
we do that. Yes, we do.
Right, it's pretty cool. So we have that too. And so you're in the grocery store, and then you can avoid going to the queue after, and you can just like pay on the thing itself and leave, right? It's kind of nice. So we have that. But how does that work when you're scanning? Let's say it's one thing if you're scanning barcodes. That's kind of easy. But what if you're scanning like avocados, or you're scanning tomatoes, or scanning a banana? Like, how does this thing know a banana is a banana? Well, one way it may know, I'm not saying this is how they actually work right now, but one way they could work is by converting the picture you take with that scanning thing into a series of vectors and comparing that to an image of a banana that's stored as a series of vectors, or multiple images of bananas from different angles, and understanding that the picture you took is in fact a banana, and therefore you have put into your cart a bunch of bananas. So that's like a really cool example as well. And of course, when we're talking about like generative AI or searching with AI results, or trying to basically leverage all that, oftentimes we're talking about vector search, basically, is what we're talking about. So being able to store your vectors, which are very complex and also very data consuming, they can get very large very quickly, in a data store alongside your actual non-vector data in the same JSON document data store, that's a really cool benefit, I would say, I would say so myself. Like that's a really cool ability to store all your data in the same place. You could do analytics in that data. You could do eventing on that data. You can monitor that data, all with collapsing like your what should we call it? Like your data sprawl, and keeping your data all in one
Yeah.
neat little pocket, one neat little place. That's basically that. That's the liberal arts version of what a data store is.
That's, like, that was such a great explanation. I have read about so much about vectors myself, but the explanation that you gave in just a few minutes is amazing. Like, it's like a refresh of all the memories that I have had about the vectors in a very short span. And that's just not me talking, but it's also our audience who mentions that they are very grateful to learn vectors from you, and they mentioned that you are an amazing explainer. So
I
I
so
do agree with
appreciate that.
Abhinav.
Thank you.
Yes,
You know, it's really, really important, I think, for those of us who come into software development from backgrounds that are not comp sci, they're not CS backgrounds or not mathematics backgrounds, to be able to understand things that when sometimes we look at the white papers on these things and they go right over your head, because if you don't
absolutely.
have a math background, it can be very hard. So one thing I love to do is to try and break down the concepts in a way that at least makes sense to me. And I'm hoping that if it makes sense to me, maybe it'll make sense to somebody else too, that also doesn't come from a CS or mathematical background.
Exactly. And I think that that's where, you can explain things so well. And personally, when I am explaining some concept, I myself, I read it like I am five. And while I'm writing or talking about it, I also have this thing that when I'm doing it, I'll consider that the people or the person who is reading my article or listening to me also doesn't have an idea about that. So, like, talk to me like I'm five, or teach me like I'm five is something that's, that's what I have been following for a while, and it has worked out well in my opinion.
It's kind of paradigm shifting, right? It's really important. And for those of you who are like joining us today and you don't come from a math background or a CS background, I just want to tell you, you can do this too. You can definitely do it. You
Absolutely.
can learn this, you can leverage it, and you can learn as much as you want, right? Like you can learn just enough to be dangerous, like learn just enough to learn to use the SDKs and the tooling
Yeah.
available to build AI powered apps. Or you could take it like one step further down the rabbit hole or two steps further down the rabbit hole and go a little deeper if you want to. You don't have to, but you can. And do it at your own pace, like whatever is comfortable for you. Don't overwhelm yourself, and just bit by bit you start learning these things and you're like, oh wow, I understand how some of this works. That's so cool. That's so nice. It's a pretty good thing.
Exactly. I think you just gave the right motivation to most people, because this is a very common question that a lot of people have, that I come from an arts background, or I come from a very different background, then how do I even get into tech? But I feel like with AI and everything coming up, it's going to make breaking into tech a little more easier. That's my opinion, by the way. It can be very, very different from what you think about things. Like, a few years back, machine learning was meant to be somebody for the mathematicians or somebody who has a master's degree or PhD. But now, even being a developer, like somebody who doesn't have a master's or a PhD, I can play with the APIs and SDKs and build an AI application. So I think that once you have the basics, it's going to be really cool and exciting for us to try and play around with AI and any tech
I
in
completely
general.
agree. And that's the benefit of the Hashnode hackathon happening right now, right? Like you're
Right.
basically incentivizing people to go jump in and do
Yep.
it and play around with it. Have you started seeing some, I mean, we're going to look at what I built obviously for a minute, but like, have you started seeing some other interesting projects start piping in and start coming in like from a variety of
Yeah.
places?
Yes, we do have a lot of submissions, and we currently, I think there is around 500 registrations, if I'm not wrong. And on a Discord
That's
channel, I see
amazing.
people. Yeah, it's really amazing. And then on a community server, like on a Discord, we see a lot of folks dropping their ideas that, hey, this is what I want to build. So I love it, because right now it's so easy to build something that a few years back it might have been like, oh, that's pretty hard. How are we even going to do that? We need to build a model from scratch. But
Mhm.
now you don't need to do any of it. So I really like how the AI shift has been, and how it's making our lives easier, and bringing all our crazy ideas into life. I mostly have crazy ideas, and I can see them in live. So that's a big win for me personally.
I also have a lot of crazy ideas all the time, and So maybe we'll talk a little about the crazy idea that I had for this little, for my little project for the hackathon. And my goal with sharing, and maybe we could share the screen now if you want
Yes.
to. My goal for sharing today is not to run the project with you all, because my goal for now, for our little bit of time together, is to basically show, in essence, how easy it can be, how straightforward it can be to start building at the most basic level using AI-powered tools like the AI SDKs from different providers, and building it into frameworks, web frameworks that you're familiar with, and integrating it into traditional, architectures you already are building with. So that's my intention now. So I hope by the end of this, our bit of time together, anyone who's watching this will say, you know what? Okay, so Ben was showing me something in Ruby on Rails, and maybe I'm not a Ruby on Rails developer, but maybe I'm a Django developer. Or like maybe I'm like a Next.js developer or a Nuxt developer, or I really like Vue, or I really work with I'm a Rust developer and I want to transpile it all to Wasm. Like whatever it may be, like whatever you're building with, I hope you walk away from this and say, you know what? It's not so circuitous. It's not so overwhelmingly difficult. There's actually a straightforward process here and a path by which I can start building. So that's my intention and my goal for our time. And then you're welcome to, of course, go to the repo. It's open, totally public source. Anyone's watching, clone the repo, use it as any kind of sample for yourselves if you want like a sample app with the MVC architecture for an AI-powered app, and you can basically edit it as do anything you want, right? Like that's basically what's happening here. So let's walk through it. So basically what this app does is based on my own real world need, right? So my wife and I have a couple kids, and the oldest is 13, the youngest is 10. The 13-year-old is actually very independent at this point, but the 10-year-old is not so independent at this point, right? He's still a 10-year-old. And oftentimes my wife and I both work full time, and one of us will come home first or finish the job first. And whoever comes home first, we often get bombarded with the question of, what's for dinner? What are we gonna have for dinner? And you're
Yeah.
tired, you've been working all day, you don't know what to do. So this app helps answer that question. How does it answer that question? You take a picture of your refrigerator, the contents inside the refrigerator, upload it to the app, and you get back a list of recipes with links to the actual recipes based on the ingredients you have. So on the actual ingredients you have, you can get back a list of sustainable and feasible recipes to build. Well, build, that sounds like a developer. Recipes to make in the kitchen. And you can deploy them to your children. And you can deploy them on a plate and give them to your children. And so that's the idea of this app. So pretty, from end to end, a pretty simple workflow. Take a picture, upload the picture gets processed, and return back a list of meals with the links to the recipes. That's the idea.
Love this.
And you can actually see, and we can post a link to the repo here. Let me just take that out, and I'll share the link with you right now, so you can share it with the chat. Okay. And so people can clone this repo whenever they would like, and the instructions are here at how to actually run it and use it, whether you use Ruby or not, but we're going to talk about it. And why is building with Ruby on Rails a helpful way to first think about these things? Because sometimes when you're building for the first time, it's really important to abstract away a lot of the things that are not what you need to worry about, to focus on what you need to actually build. So you're not here to build your first CSS, HTML website, right? That's another hackathon. You're here to build an AI-powered app. So let's use a framework that provides for you all of your models, your views, and controllers kind of architecture, so you could just kind of in a plug and play dynamic build what you need without having to worry so much about the architecture. That's also one of the benefits, by the way, of Couchbase, right? So Couchbase's database as a service we call Capella, cloud.couchbase.com. It's free to sign up and use. And by using Couchbase Capella, you also don't have to worry about the database infrastructure. You don't have to worry about setting up your database, figuring out database health, the operation of your database, all that kind of stuff. You just create an account, create what we call buckets, which are basically tables, create a bucket, name it whatever you want, and just start putting data into it. And then the rest is, it's done. So both Ruby on Rails and Couchbase both kind of take a lot of that work out for you. So you see that we need a few API keys, right, when we're building with this app. We need to have an API key for OpenAI, because we're building with OpenAI. You can, of course, use any other AI provider you want. And there are other ones, of course. OpenAI is, of course, a big one, but it's not the only one. There are other ones. You can, and they have their own SDKs too. So in this example, we're using OpenAI. And then you need a few things from Couchbase. You need your connection string URL. This is the URL by which your web app interacts with the database, and you get that from your dashboard. You need the name of your bucket, so whatever you called it. In this example, I called it recipes. Call it whatever you want. Call it my favorite bucket in the world. Call it the bucket to all buckets, the bucket of buckets, like the bucket of buckets, like whatever you want. And then you need your username and password, the credentials, you create them as well. And the last bit here, you may not be familiar with this. Some of you probably are, but maybe some folks watching are not. There's always a challenge when you're building locally and you need to interact with the outside world. How do you get your local host to be accessible to the rest of the internet? And this is important because we send the picture to OpenAI, right? We upload a picture locally to localhost, and then because we're working on a local development, right? We haven't deployed this onto any kind of provider. It's all local. So we send the picture to OpenAI, to their server. OpenAI wants to respond to us with a response, but it can't send a response to localhost :3000. Like that's not an internet accessible URL. So welcome to the world of ngrok. And if you're not familiar with ngrok, ngrok is one of many tools, but a very popular tool by which you can create basically a tunnel between your local environment and the internet. And what it does is it gives you depending on you can get a paid plan and get a permanent URL. You can do the free plan, and every time you boot it up, get a different kind of temporary URL. It gives you an external URL. So we create an environment variable to specify our URL. And we do that because I'm using the paid plan, and I'm assuming other people, the free plan, sorry. And I'm assuming other people are using the free plan also. And so therefore, we're going to have to, every time we start up the app, have to put in a new temporary ngrok URL. And I don't want to have to manually go through all the places where we use ngrok and update that. So let's just update it as an environment variable, change the environment variable once each time we boot it up, and the rest are all defined as variables, wherever we have in the rest of the app. Kind of like define it once, use it many times kind of model, right? And so we can see that if we look at the example.env file, you would just come in here, rename it to .env, and put in your values yourself. And then at the source of every Ruby on Rails app is what we call a gem file. You're getting a little intro into Ruby on Rails too, if you're not familiar with it. A gem file is kind of the same as a package.json in Node.js, or a cargo.toml in Rust. Basically, it's where you define your dependencies for your project. And each dependency is, of course, called a gem because it's Ruby, so everything's a gem. We're all gems. You're a gem, I'm a gem, we're all a gems. And everything is the same as a generic fresh build Rails app, except we've added a few other gems that were not in there previously. We added the Couchbase Ruby SDK. We added the Couchbase ORM gem, which is not an official Couchbase SDK, but it's being built by our friends at another company called Doctolib, and I'm really a fan of this ORM. And what it does is, if you're familiar with ORMs, what do they stand for? Object Relational Models. They basically provide you with a way to interact with your database with methods. So instead of writing pure SQL, you can use method calls, like you're building code. You don't need to write a whole SQL statement. But ORMs are only good with SQL databases. Couchbase is not a SQL database, so you couldn't use an ORM. And so, Rails comes with a very powerful ORM. In fact, I think it may be the first ORM ever built, called Active Record, built into Rails. But that's not helpful when you're working with a NoSQL database. But our friends at Doctolib built an ORM for Couchbase. And so you can use all of the methods you're familiar with when you're building with an ORM with a non-SQL database like Couchbase, which is really cool. And then we use the Ruby SDK from OpenAI. And this is an image processing gem, which allows us to like transform images, crop them, resize them, all that kind of fun stuff. Carrier wave is a popular gem for uploads, file uploads, and then .env Rails is a Rails implementation of the .env package, which allows us to use .env .env files for our credentials. There are two ways to store credentials in Rails. There is .env and there's also Rails credentials. If you're working with a production level app, I would not recommend using a .env. I would use the Rails secure credentials instead. But in this case, we're just going to use .env for simplicity's sake. That's our gem file. So all we've done to our gem file is basically add 6 new gems, right? And technically, if I'm not mistaken, I'm being overly judicious here, we could only need to add the Ruby SDK at this point. We can just add the Couchbase ORM gem because the Couchbase ORM gem has as a dependency the Couchbase Ruby SDK. So we don't even really need that one. So it's really just 5. But I put 6 in because I'm just very conservative on these things and I overly define things, but that's just me. Okay, so that's the gem file. You've installed these gems, now what do you do? So we have to define a connection to our database. And we do that by creating in what we call the initializers folder in a Rails app, which are all these things inside an initializers folder are the things that get booted up when you boot up your Rails app. So amongst them, we create a file called couchbase.yml. Rails loves YAML files, by the way, couchbase.yaml, couchbase.yml. And we essentially define the connection config for our database. If you're really good about these things, you're going to have a different config for your development, test, and production. You'll have a development bucket, a test bucket, a production bucket. You're not going to use the same one for all of them. I'm not necessarily doing best practices here. And so it's one Couchbase connection for all of them. I wouldn't recommend that. I'd recommend building out separate ones for your development environment, your test environment, etc. But okay, once we've done that, we can now actually instantiate and we can interact with our Couchbase connection and interact with our data. That's it. OpenAI, we initialize OpenAI with an OpenAI client. So we add a constant called OpenAI to our config, Rails config, which is an instantiated OpenAI client, making it globally accessible to our app. So far, so good.
Yes, I'm learning a lot. So this is my first time seeing Ruby on Rails code. I'm learning a lot from you. Seeing Ruby for the first time is pretty exciting.
I happen to really like Ruby. Like I work in other languages as well, right? We all work in many languages, but Ruby was my first love language in programming, and it still is with me to this day. And I'm on the board of Ruby Central. We're actually having an event coming up in Chicago very soon. We're having RubyConf. Recommend if anyone's in the US, you should come to RubyConf. It'll be fantastic. I believe it's going to be in November. And there are scholarship tracks. So if you are a new developer or a developer from a diverse background or underrepresented background, I would definitely encourage you to please apply for the scholarship track. That helps make it more financially accessible to come to RubyConf. It's a fantastic, beautiful event. Okay, that's a pitch for Ruby. Okay, so now that we've done that, we are basically ready to build our app. And as I mentioned, Rails operates on a models, views, controllers paradigm. You don't have to be familiar with Rails to have heard of MVC, but Rails invented the MVC paradigm. So everything after Rails is copying Rails. So like Django is a copy of Rails. Laravel is a copy of Rails. They're all copies of Rails in different language frameworks. So like one for PHP, one for Python, etc. Right? But Rails was the beginning of all of this. And basically what that does is say, I'm going to separate my concerns. So I'm going to put my business logic here, my view logic here, and my interaction with my business logic here. So we create a model called recipe. And recipe is where we define basically what is a recipe, right? We define the definition of a recipe. And for our case, a recipe is something that has an image, something that has an array of recipe titles, and a date of when it was created with a default of today. And we also want to validate that every time I upload a picture, I'm actually uploading something, right? So every time I update either update or upload something new, I need to make sure that the image is actually present, okay? And then we also create a function, a method on the recipe model that gets invoked every time I create a new recipe. And we call this analyze image and store recipe. And this is where we're going to end, because this is the important bit. This is actually, I think, the key of our entire conversation, to show you essentially how easy it is to build with AI. It's really, really straightforward. So this function, this method called analyze image and store recipes, takes in the image that was uploaded using the image uploader module, takes in the image that was uploaded, finds its path, right? Finds the path of the image, and then creates a message array of 2 objects. The first object says, you are an assistant tasked with listing the items in a refrigerator. Only return items in a comma-separated list and nothing else. Do not include any other information or any other text. And then the second one is a type. So the first one's type text. The second one is a type of image URL. And what's the image URL? Look at this. ngrok. Environment variable fetch, ngrok URL, and the path of the image. So why did we create this? What do you think? Where are we going to send this to?
I think Couchbase. Isn't that the obvious
we're going to
answer?
send it to OpenAI. We're going to send it to
Oh,
OpenAI.
oh
This
wow.
is our
Oh, yeah.
message body that we're sending to OpenAI. So now we have messages. We're sending 2 messages to OpenAI, and now we create a chat to OpenAI. We create a variable called response, which holds the value of this method invocation on the OpenAI client. And we say we want to use the GPT 4o model. And our messages are the messages that we just created here. You're an assistant, give me recipes, nothing else, and here's the image. And then our role is user. You can either be a role of a system or a user. System is what you use when you want to condition a user's prompt and add preconditioning around a user's prompt. User is the user's prompt itself. In this case, we don't need to precondition it, so we're just using the user type. Okay, and then we get back the items in the fridge by digging through the response we get, and it's an array nested in an array, a couple levels deep from the OpenAI response. We dig through that, we find our items, and we assign that to items in the fridge, and then we make sure that we update our data in Couchbase to now get the recipe titles and add them to that array. Remember, we created recipe titles as an attribute on the model with an empty array. So now we add those, and we change the date to now. That's when the recipes were created, and that's it. And then we're done. And this is, that's it. Fetch recipes from OpenAI. We fetch them, and we get the recipes, and that's it. And then when the controller basically defines the routes of our web app. So when somebody creates when they go to recipes, web app / index, whatever the main view is, just web app localhost:3000, and they create a new recipe. First you create a new model, and then you get the image. And then if it's stored, meaning if there is a recipe image there, then we assign that to the image parameter of the recipe. We save it. If it did save correctly, then we fetch the recipe title from OpenAI, and then we redirect the user to the URL path for the recipe to show them the actual recipes that they received. And then that's it. And if it didn't save, we re-render the main image, the new path. So if the fail path is to re-render the view they're on, the success path is to take them to the recipe path with the recipe ID and show them all their recipes. And that, my friends, is essentially the entire thing. And I welcome you to go and actually check it out. You can see here, this is the blog post I wrote about it on, I think, one of the best developer blogging platforms in the world, Hashnode. And you can go on Hashnode and you can find the blog about it, which also has a link to the repo. Where is the link to the repo? Right over here. So we click on that link, it'll take you to the repo. You can actually see a GIF of the app working in this. So if I maybe make that a little bigger, I know it's really kind of choppy, but see, recipe, there's the picture. And then if the person scrolls down, that was the picture that they uploaded. And then over there is a bullet point list of all the recipes it generated. And then you can click on any one of those recipes and get the recipe. So that's essentially what this is. So I actually encourage you all to go to the GitHub of this repo and use it if you want as the basis for your project for Hashnode. Like, just maybe change the prompts, maybe make a new use case. Like, what is basically for a hackathon project, my advice, what is the problem that's bugging you? What is the thing on your mind that you would say to yourselves, I wish AI could help me with? I wish AI could do this. Because guess what, my friends? You are a developer. You have the magical power to answer that question and make it happen. When other people say, I wish AI could do this, they don't know how to do it. They have no recourse. You are like a magical wizard in like Lord of the Rings. You can build it yourself. You can make it happen with code. So if you have a problem and you're like, I wish AI could solve it. Like for me, I want recipes. For you, maybe it's something else. And I think this basically this skeleton of a Ruby on Rails app could be the skeleton for your project. So I would love to see what you build and see if you fork it. I'm definitely going to check it out and see the things you build based on the forks. And yeah, that's basically it. And I definitely recommend that you use Couchbase as your data store for this. Not because I work at Couchbase, and that's not why I say you should use it, although of course I do work at Couchbase, so obviously I'm going to say that. But it's also because Couchbase gives you that unique advantage of working with data as JSON. So that simplifies your context, and you simpler context, the better. And secondly, you can interact with all types of data, all structured, unstructured data in one data store. You can store your images, store your data, store your vector embeddings, store everything in one data store and not need to like have this huge problem that manifests very quickly of data sprawl. And you could do that by going to cloud.couchbase.com and creating your free account and getting going.
I love it. I love the demo. I loved your idea. And after this demo, I think I'll be copying or taking inspiration from your idea to build an application for myself.
I
And
love
with
it.
I'll build like I'm already in the I'm addition phase of building an app where you can scan your plants and it can detect the diseases for you. So that's where I'll be taking the inspiration and probably also end up using Couchbase as a database. So thank you for that. I love the demo. A lot of things for me to learn. I love the gem files in Ruby. Maybe it's high time for me to try out Ruby as well. And I also see some comments from our audience who mentions that Couchbase is superb. They loved the demo that you just showed, so it's very similar to my expressions as well. So yeah, Ben, thank you so much for your time and showing us what you built and helping us understand vectors Ruby. So there's so much to take away from this 30-minute session. We learned about Ruby, we learned about vectors, we learned about AI, database and everything. So I think it was a very power packed session from your end, and I loved every bit of it.
I am so delighted that you invited me onto the stream. Thank you so much. It was really a privilege, and it was so fun to talk to you. And I hope I get to see you in person soon. We almost met in person
Yes.
in London, in New York. Where were we? I don't even remember which city at this point.
It was in
Somewhere
London. Yeah.
in London. It's so hard to remember. Where
Yeah.
you globe-trotting people. You DevRel. We're just globe-trotting all the time. But I hope to get to meet you again in person soon. And this has really been such a
Absolutely.
joy.
Yes, I really hope the same. And like our audience is mentioning that it was lovely having you here and we loved what you built. And what I'll also do is I'll quickly share your profile here on the chat so that they can connect with you on Twitter if they have any questions. And if there is any other profile that you would like to link, please share with me in the chat. I'll also add it in the comments. But here you go. That's Ben's X or Twitter profile. He is super active there. At any point, I'm sure that you can DM him or ask him questions, and he'll be more than happy to help.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I look forward to hearing from all of you. Have a great rest of your evening, your day, your morning, whatever time in the world it is for you.
Thank you so much, Ben, and to our audience, thank you so much for being with us, for being here with us. It was lovely. I am also looking forward to all the submissions that you will be making for the hackathon. So, once again, thank you, Ben, and to our audience, thank you for being here. And I'll see you next week with another live stream. So, yeah, that's all from my end. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.